Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session Recording 175. My name is Danny Beaumont and I'm a Principal Product Manager on the Adobe Muse team. I will be joined today by at least one of my colleagues, Razvan, who is the incredible engineer that actually renders our responsive code in the browser. He's still driving at the moment, but I know he says he's 1 minute away from the office. It's going to be fine. As we work today, if you're new here, the idea is go ahead and throw any questions you have into the chat. Razvan and perhaps some other people from the team will join and help me out in the chat. If there's a question that has to do with the topic we're covering today, it helps me a lot to put that in the presenter polling area in the lower right. I showed it at the beginning and I'll show it again at the end. I also have a poll around what we should talk about next. So we do jam sessions every other week, and I'm kind of open for suggestions for 2 weeks from now. The first suggestion was around really talking about nesting widgets inside themselves. I think that's a great area to focus on, and with responsive, there's definitely extra effort that's going to be put in that direction. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to begin sharing my screen. If you have sound issues, it's usually your network. There is always going to be a YouTube recording that's pretty clear and does not have sound issues that I will push live later today. So if that happens to you, you may want to just come back and watch the recording. All right, I was obviously doing a little bit of research this morning. As usual, I have a series of notes that I am going to put into the chat. I will share this note screen up, and if you're looking at the YouTube recordings, if you look in the notes, I will add this link to the notes area. Kristen, I don't know how you can hear the banjos and not hear me. If there's a global sound issue, let me know now, because there's nothing worse than talking to myself in a room. Do other folks have good sound? Okay. All right, we're going to keep going. So today we're talking about responsive best practices. This is probably one of the sessions that makes my engineering colleagues cringe the most because we as a team are constantly improving Muse, adding new functionality, and trying to adapt to the use cases that are out there. Sometimes, though, given the feature set that we have, you need to have power tips and tricks, workarounds, things that are not necessarily apparent about how you work with the application to achieve certain goals. So I call this a jam session. People don't understand the banjos. I don't either sometimes, but it's a jam session for me because we all learn from each other. I am full-time on Muse, but I don't use it all day long to do projects. I learned from early adopters of Muse. Some of those early adopters have bubbled up to become full-time Muse partners, building templates and widgets to achieve the goals that you guys bring up in your day-to-day as you use the tool. So this jam session is really focused on, it's kind of like my journey in the last 6 months as I've learned to use the tool and have come up with challenges that I've tried to overcome and have learned about responsive, and also had the support of my peers. So as I mentioned, folks that build templates and widgets and how they've gone about solving problems. So y'all have to walk the walk. My big, rich web experience is not that rich or deep because I'm a product manager by day, but I'm a mom by night, and my job is to maintain this website, the Pacific Rowing Club site. And they asked for a responsive version of the site. As you can see, as a static site, I have a problem, which is if you get much smaller than desktop, I've got this silly fixed column on the left-hand side that totally gets in the way of a tablet. I've done a phone layout using alternate layouts, but I really want to evolve the whole site over to responsive. And I've been in the midst of doing that, trying to use built-in tools. So for the most part, trying to avoid using any third-party widgets as we evolve. So if you've used Muse for a while, you probably have seen that we sort of climbed onto this new platform known as responsive, and we've brought over our usual tool set, but some of the ways in the past that we've achieved goals with Muse have gone away for the moment. So one of those is scroll effects. And the reason for that, I've explained it in the past, but when you are building a site, if you look at this rowing club site, I have a very simple scroll effect. So notice as I scroll towards the top, I have an animation that is reducing the size of the logo for me. And then I pin my navigation so that it stays to the top of the page. And what happened is when we were engineering the responsive feature set, we had a realization, which is that scroll effects are really dependent on the distance of an object. So if I come back here and say basically the distance of this navigation in relationship to the top of the browser, when I use scroll effects, I say, do me a favor, take the T handle, stretch it here, and when this object hits the top of the browser, I want you to pin it or keep it in a fixed location. What we realize from an engineering standpoint is that's totally dependent on the width of your browser. If in a responsive design I were to make this smaller and all of my objects were to move down based on the width, it's going to really affect that T handle and how the scroll effect is applied. So we're scratching our heads a little bit around how to build a user experience that allows you to apply scroll effects in the world of responsive design. Right now, the proposal on the table is that if you build a site that has a page with multiple breakpoints, but the breakpoints are adaptive, they're basically fixed and not fluid breakpoints, we could probably implement scroll effects. I'm not necessarily convinced that it's going to satisfy some of these big navigation needs that we still have around responsive. So it's definitely a dialogue. I usually do a little more orientation before I jump in, by the way. So let's do that because it's going to come up in conversation right now. So in that dialogue, there are great ways for you, if you're new to Muse, to reach out to us. One is at the footer of our website. We have a link to our private pre-release, join the private beta program. You can just go to museprerelease.com. That's a great place to join in on the conversation around, for example, what's most critical about scroll effects when it comes to the world of responsive design? How should we implement it, and what are the minimum features that you really are suffering from not having right now? Other great places to come are tutorials. So when we release a new version of Muse, I tend to record up some quick videos that give you a quick sense of those new feature sets. When we delivered this in February, I did that. So these videos here are all brand new content that acclimate you to what's new with Muse. The how to create a responsive website in Muse, this is, I've done this a few times. I did it with Katie's Cafe, and I may have even done it with Kevin's Coffee Cart, which is going way back. But it is an in-depth step-by-step tutorial for the Creative Cloud Learn channel. And it takes about 65 minutes of video. It'll probably take you a few hours. But if you are brand new to responsive Muse, I encourage you to watch this step-by-step tutorial. There are demo assets you can follow along with me to build out your site. So that is there, and that's available in new. And then there's also a series of starter designs. If you've, again, not really experienced responsive very much, these starter designs are free. They're available to you to download and just interact with. We by no means are going in the template business. That's really better handled by the other folks that are out there that build Muse templates. But we did want to have something when you're brand new that's free and available. Each of these starter designs, if you click on the preview area, I've also gone in, the intent was to say, hey, how can you customize a design and build your own really quickly? So in the preview for each of these templates, there are little tooltips. And if you click on the tooltip, it's a very short video where I show you in Muse how to customize this design for your own content. So I encourage you, if you're new, to give that a try as well, especially in this world of responsive. From there, there's some classic older recordings and tutorials that are out there. Lastly, there's the events area, probably not lastly. This is where you can learn what's coming up. Facebook is an excellent place to keep track of as well for the upcoming sessions. Widgets have exploded lately. We have, I think we're at almost 800 different widgets. And widgets are common web behaviors that can be configured and styled in general. The third-party widgets that you'll find here are using the standard HTML open standard to build out content that you can build into Muse to actually select content, something similar to Embed code, but it has an on-object UI, a user interface to allow you how to configure that. We'll play with a little bit of widgets today, not so much the third-party widgets, but I encourage you to come by here. You can just search by free at first and see what you can download and play with, and then jump into any of the sold widgets based on what you're doing. There are many responsive widgets that have been updated lately to support the new responsive feature set. So depending on your goals, and in fact, I've done a recent tour of everything that's out there, so you're welcome to throw into chat what you've been looking to achieve. That may be something you can do within Muse in its native form, or it may be something that a third-party widget can help you out with. Everything we're going to focus on today, though, is using the built-in features of Muse and solving responsive problems. Last point I want to make is site of the day. If you are doing work and you think it's gorgeous, please send it to us. Submit it to the site of the day area. I'll be honest, the team that's selecting site of the day is mostly leaning towards responsive designs. So we're still picking maybe one or two each week that's using non-responsive, using the more static methodology, but we are leaning towards responsive design. And it's a great place for me, I know, to learn about how people are using the tool. Can be a great place for you as well. All right, with that said, I'm going to swing back and I'm going to check and see if Razvan has joined us real quick, like he promised. Unfortunately, I got to swing back over. Bear with me just a second. Yeah. Hey, Colby, that's all I need to know. So quick question for Colby or Razvan that I just want to put out there. Is there any consequence to the load time on a page based on the number of breakpoints that you have? So if I have a site that's got 3 breakpoints or 10 breakpoints, is the load time going to be significantly impacted based on the number of breakpoints? Razvan's typing. I get to take a sip of my soda. All right, I'm going to wait and read that answer later because I want to get going. But I'll swing back through. Okay, so we're talking power tips. And as I mentioned, I sort of wanted to walk the walk, and I had this legacy website. And one of the first things I did is try to open up this very big, pretty old, it's been around for about 2 years now, website in the responsive instance of Muse. And best practices will tell you that if you're taking an old design that's of any real significant complexity, the best thing you should do would be to pretty much say file new and try to create the site from scratch. It's depending on how you built that original site, you want to methodically go through and look at each element and check and see that you've built it in the responsive feature set. Sometimes things will just be mysteriously odd, and it's just a lot easier if you say file new. As I mentioned, I did open up an older design, and when I did that, in case you are doing it, again, the nature of this session is tips and tricks and lessons learned as we've gone along. So I'm going to open up that design. It's a total wreck right now because I'm really using it to test things and not really redesigning it quite yet for the team. Yeah, let's try this. I'm going to open up one that does not require the latest beta. How's that? This could get me there. So I have this design, and it's kind of complex. As I mentioned, there's a good deal of content there, a lot of content on each page. One of the key learnings I've had is if you're going to come in and add new pages to this design, you want to first come in under File to Site Properties, and make sure that you define the site as a fluid width site. This will affect any new pages that you might add to the design. If it's fixed width, it's going to try to add fixed pages. So changing that to fluid width does not change the existing content. That will just change any new content. The other step you want to take is go to each of your individual pages and come on into that breakpoint, that single breakpoint, and set it to be fluid width. You'll want to also come in and do that for each of your individual pages. Okay, I am going to go by cheat sheets a little bit today because, as I mentioned, it's kind of a smattering of just things that I've learned as we've gone along. So anchors to the left. This was a big one. Colby and I debugged it. It was driving me crazy. So if you look at this design for a moment, what I have had in the past is each of these sections uses anchor tags, and I had that side navigation. So there were anchors for each of my elements. Because of the nature of responsive, and as you take the width of the browser and make it smaller by dragging it, let's say, from the right over to the left, if I have an anchor point, let's say in the middle here, it's going to affect the content below that anchor point. So one of the first things you want to do if you do have an old design or if you're working with anchor points, come on in and select an anchor point on that page. And if you right click, you can select the same. So select all breakpoints on that page. So they're now all selected, and I could drag them. I could drag them off to the left. I can drag them off to the right. With them all selected, I can come into the Align panel, make sure they're all aligned to one another, and then make sure you get them off the page to the left. So power trick number one. Razvan can probably, I'm putting him on the spot a little bit today, but he has, as I mentioned, has had to take this visual design canvas and manifest it as in-browser responsive design. And we've worked very hard. There are different engineers that worry about what you see on that canvas and making sure it's representing what's going to happen in the browser. Razvan is responsible for generating this responsive code. So it's amazing magic that we've never seen in a visual design tool before. And some of the nuances, things like who knew that anchor tags would break the design, we haven't necessarily found visual ways to let you know that yet. So thus the purpose of power tips and tricks. How to reveal a hidden element on a breakpoint. I had a person reach out to me this week because they were watching that Building Your First Responsive Site for Pigeon, and I never mentioned it. So it's a really good question, a really good point. If I come into my site plan here, and I'll show you the footer or the master page that I'm working on. When you're designing for responsive, there's also sort of a metaphor that we've kind of broken or changed in this release that's worth mentioning. If you think about this design, what I've got is navigation at the top, and I've got active page content in the middle. And as I go through each of these breakpoints, if you look at the top navigation, I've created the breakpoints explicitly for my navigation. So the mantra with Muse in our current world of web design is you do not define breakpoints per device, per class of devices anymore. You may mentally say, you know what, when people are on a desktop device, they're going to be navigating with a mouse. When they're in a tablet, they're going to be navigating with a tablet. And having one of those days, bear with me, I haven't started my recording, I think, which is big trouble. Let's see. Oh, maybe I did. Okay, all's good. That's what happens when you get up really early in the morning. Where was I? We were talking about my navigation. So in this design, I've got pretty much what I would do for a desktop design. And then I do mentally think if I'm in a touch-enabled device like a tablet, so as my size gets to about 950, people will no longer have a mouse. They're going to use their finger to navigate and interact with the site. So notice that at 1300, I'm in a desktop class of devices. As you get closer to about 1100 here or 1200, I've reduced the size of my navigation so that it's not going to conflict with the logo that I have here in the center. When I go to 950, I'm now considering that I'm more in the world of a tablet device. So I have a Hamburger menu, a drop-down menu, using, in this instance, I'm playing with the cookie.com push menu, but it's also something I can do using an accordion menu with built-in Muse features. The idea is that I need much larger navigation that you can use with your finger. I then went to the next breakpoint, and in that I reduced the size of my logo, and this pretty much covers me from 700 pixels down to the minimum width of the browser. Now, there have been some questions that have come out. I'm going to throw this to Colby and Razvan. And that is asking, when it comes to viewport scaling, when do we enable viewport scaling? So for example here, I've got a site that's set to 772 pixels. If I go to an iPhone, which is much smaller, more in the class of about, I think it's 300 to 400 pixels in width. I believe what we do is we'll take this content, this 772 pixel content, and using viewport scaling, we will scale the content to that smaller device and smaller breakpoint. This is kind of really important and interesting. Notice that my minimum width here is 320. If I go to look at this page in a web browser, the browser is not going to get as small as 320. Let me go ahead and show this. So if I say File, Preview Page in the browser, it's going to come in and render this header area for me and all of my breakpoints, and I can do a rough approximation to see what it's going to look like on a desktop. I can swing on down to that tablet class of device, and I see my menu appear here. And as I'm getting smaller, and you'll notice I have some nice little plugins here that are telling me the width of my browser. So I'm at 631 pixels at the moment. If I come even smaller, things are looking good, but notice how it stops at 400. I can't see 320. The thing is, as a designer, I believe guidance from our team is go ahead and set your minimum size, this size here, to about 400. And you can, what plugin is this? I saw that come up. I think it's called like responsive. Breakpoint, nice name, right? So it's a Chrome extension called Breakpoint that'll give you that feedback. There's another one that I just found, this window resizer. It allows you to kind of jump to what has been classically standard breakpoints. And notice as I drag on the lower right-hand side of my browser, see how it's indicating the window size for me? So that's a separate plugin that will also give you the feedback in the bottom. I kind of like this one in that it doesn't really get in the way of the design too much, but I can glance and see it. You can also hit a keyboard command. I think it's Alt and the arrows, and it'll move at 1 pixel at a time. And that's the Breakpoint plugin that does that. Okay, so back to my point. I can't get any smaller than 400 here. When you're designing, if you set your smallest breakpoint more around 400, you can rest assured, unless those two guys, Colby and Resizer, are arguing with me, that viewport scaling is going to take that smallest breakpoint and scale down to, let's say, the iPhone 4, which I think is the smallest breakpoint or smallest viewport scale that's pretty much out there these days for some of the smartphones. Okay, so as I'm working in my master, I have a number of breakpoints defined here for that purpose, and it's really for my headers and footers. What I have learned, and this is where I get nervous because Colby and Resizer may feel differently, I've been told that the best way to make sure that widgets, when they're placed on pages, that they behave the way you would expect them to, is pretty much to go ahead and carry over the breakpoints that you defined in the master onto the page. Now, again, that's specifically if you have widgets that are working in your design. What you'll notice in the design I have here, I've got some big blobs of text. And I've been trying really hard to not put a breakpoint on my page. The reason for me for that is as you're working, the minute you add a second breakpoint, every single element that you're designing, you need to check every breakpoint to see how it behaves. And from a design standpoint, I think you really just want to be conscious about when you add them. So I think rule of thumb is try to not add them. You'll notice in this page right now, if I preview it in the browser, before I do so, the little triangles are indicating master page breakpoints, but I don't have any breakpoints defined on the page. And my goal right now is to see if I can get away with that with my basic elements in place. So I'm going to just preview this page and kind of show you the behavior that I'm getting out of the box with the design. So I've got my header elements. We've already looked at that. As I press and drag the edge here, I've defined each of these text elements to be fluid in width. So they're placed on the page. They're not pinned. They're just placed. I've got a header with a line. I've got a text container. I've got a button that's aligning to the left. And pretty much there's no requirement for me down to my smallest breakpoint to come in and have to add another breakpoint. So I'm going to leave this page alone as much as I can. You will notice that I have a table here. This is not, Muse does not have built-in tables. This is a simple HTML embed table. So it's a little painful. There are some nice widgets that you can do without having to hand code. But there's an attribute in that table that I set, and I'll show you that for a second. If I jump to these tables, like I said, it's a little bit of scary code. But in that HTML, what you'll notice is, actually I'm lying, this is using Muse themes, and they do have a widget that allows you to work with it. And that Muse themes widget, it's a couple years old. They've updated it, but it does support responsive width for that table. So I didn't have to do anything. That code, that iframe that's being placed on the canvas is also fluid in width. So everything's good there. As you look at other pages though, I'm gonna have to start to add breakpoints, and you'll kind of get to where I'm working. As I mentioned, I use this more to learn. I haven't done much for the club in finishing this design. But notice that we have elements that are here. And in the desktop design, they're kind of side by side. I've got this really tough little bio area with the longest biographies for coaches I've ever seen in my life. And right now I'm using a trigger target widget for that. So what I need to do as I'm evolving my design is start to move into the world known as flat design and card-based design. And I'm going to jump out now. Let me go ahead and in Evernote, I'm going to grab this link and I'm going to give it to you in the chat so that you can follow along if you would like to. I'm going to read what Razvan said later because, like a jam session, I will learn from him. But in these notes, I've got some best practices and some just information that I found on the web around what we're trying to do, which is learn to be responsive designers. And as you scroll down here, to the extent that you need to learn about this, this may be something you're familiar with, learning about this idea of flat design or card-based design. I think it's kind of funny because you see design trends, and it didn't really occur to me until I started digging in. The reason why flat design and card-based design is occurring is that as a designer, to take a site like this rowing website and really think about every single element in every single breakpoint in every single device is absolutely overwhelming. So what I think you do is you evolve as a designer to start thinking, I mean, I'm talking pen and paper or whiteboard level. When you add any element to your design, think about how each of those modules, those molecular modules, need to behave across all of these devices. There's a mindset out there, and somebody can, again, teach me more than I know, but it's called, this idea that says mobile first. And a colleague, Aaron Lawrence, he works at Pivotal Labs up the street, and he's an incredible typographer and Muse designer. He's done work in the past for us. He was giving a talk on mobile first for Pivotal. And he said it's kind of funny because people think that means when you're designing a website, you start with the phone layout first. It's really not that. What he's suggesting is mobile first means from a business standpoint, your client needs to be thinking about their mobile customer and making sure their business satisfies that because it's such an explosive area for interacting with the web. When you're designing your website, it's not necessarily, okay, maybe mobile first, but mobile and desktop. It's more designing for the extreme rule, which says that, you know what, I need to have a contact form, and that contact form needs to look good at 1400 pixels wide on a desktop device and at 400 pixels wide on a phone. So really thinking in that molecular manner, designing for the extreme, making sure a headline will look good on desktop and look good on a phone is more the practice you want to go through as you're designing your site. So thinking about that and this idea of molecular design to me is really interesting. Some of these articles get into it, but I'm going to show you one of the templates, one of the systems that's out there from Muse Themes that I really love. Even if you're not going to buy this template from the Muse Themes guys, I really love the mindset that they're using around it. So let me jump over and show you around that a little bit. So if I go to Muse Themes, and I jump over to their stacks area, They have one stack. It's a new concept that they just introduced, and it's around responsive design. So if you look at this site, this is a Muse template in essence, but it's delivered to you as a customer in modules or molecular elements. And I really love, again, the mindset that they're using here. So as you look at this design, I've got navigation at the top. I've got a header area here. I've got text. I've got images that occur. And as I drag through from desktop to tablet, my design changes. I can swing on down to phone and I become single column in my design. If you're taking out pen and paper or a whiteboard, as you're adding these elements, really thinking across the different devices and how in a card-based like method, you're going to organize your content. So card-based really just thinks of things as cubes or sections. If you look at this 3 across gathering of content here, for desktop, I've got text in 3 columns, right? As I drag it down, it's going to jump down to 2 columns. So I'm now more in something like a tablet. If I drag down even further, it's going to take me to that phone layout, which gets much taller, and I have a single column. So that molecular mindset is really important as you're planning out your design. It'll keep you from backing yourself into corners. So let's look at this stacks concept in Muse a little bit. So I'm here in the Muse application, and the one sort of interesting thing you need to do, if I can get to the right place here, got a lot of windows open, stacks base file. All right, the stacks base file is honestly a whole lot of nothing. So this is delivered from Muse Themes. And interestingly enough, on the master page, all it is some predefined breakpoints. Now, this is what I'm putting to Colby and Razvan as a question. Is this many breakpoints a bad idea? As a designer, I find the less breakpoints, the better, because it's less to maintain across time. I think the intent here with the Muse Themes folks is to give you more breakpoints than you need and let you delete the ones that you don't need. But this is sort of a starting set of all the breakpoints you might ever want. And that's all that's on this master page. If I now come into the home page, it's also just a blank page, but notice that the breakpoints are on the active page as well. So I'm going to show you how I would do that just to make sure we understand. If I come in and add a second page, and we'll call it 2, and I double click here, I can see the little triangles which are indicating the breakpoints that are on the master. As I'm working, and this is up for debate, in some instances with widgets and such, I may want to make sure that those breakpoints come over. And the way I do that is come to the triangle for any one of these breakpoints. Let's zoom out a little bit. And if I double click on that triangle, it's going to move me to that location and create a breakpoint there. Let's try it again. If I click once on the triangle, it's moving to that location and it's enabling me to add that as a breakpoint by giving me a plus symbol. If I want to do it more quickly, I click twice, 1, 2. Maybe I got lucky that time. So click once to jump there and then click the second time to add the breakpoint. So that's going to carry over those master breakpoints to my page. With it set now, let's look at how this stacks structure works a little bit. So I'm going to come into my library, and this is where I'll get myself in big trouble because I've been using the beta, so I haven't loaded it in here, but give me a second. I think I can get there pretty quickly. Hold on. Yes, it's going to be one of those jam sessions. Okay, so the stacks system, when it's delivered to you, comes with a library item. I'm going to just drag it over here so I can make sure I have many versions of Muse loaded. Let's try it anyhow. I'm going to double click. Okay. I have beta Muse and shipping Muse on the same machine, so my world can be odd, but I now have that library loaded. And what I can do is if I'm looking at their design, I can get a sense of all the elements that are available to me. I already know the pieces I want, and I'm just going to do this quickly. I can come in and grab a little bit of navigation. Let's see. Start with just some header. And I'll press and drag it into position. Now, interestingly enough, I'm going to try to carefully press and drag this right to the top, because what it's going to do is bring over all of that content across all of the breakpoints. So I'm bringing it over a little bit more to get it lined up, and I'm going to bring it down towards the top. So that's pretty interesting. You're like, okay, Danny, no big deal there. Notice as I jump amongst each of the breakpoints, these stacks, they need to be realigned a little bit, but these stacks are automatically applying the design to all of the breakpoints. So they're optimized for phone and desktop. My point here, again, I want to emphasize is not that you necessarily go off and buy this, although that would make the Muse Themes guys really happy. My point is that as you're designing, you mentally want to do the same thing. If I come in and grab, let's say, that 3-column design, so I've got 3 columns with thumbnails, and I'm going to drag that into position, try to get it right to where I want it to be, just below the content above it. And then I'm going to do it a second time just to get it lined up. So I've got that 3-column structure. When I go to some of the smaller breakpoints, now this is kind of something I think we need to work on. It's remembering the original location in the height of the page there. So I need to adjust a bit. But notice I've got that 3-column structure. Now I'm jumping to a tablet design, and it's already optimized for 2-column structure. Jump over just a little bit more, and I can see where I'm moving into the class of mobile devices, and I've got just 1 column. Just get right back up here to the top. All right, so without much fuss or muss, I've gone in and I've loaded up this page. Let's take a look at how it behaves in the browser without doing much work. I've got that header area and I've got a 3-column structure. As I press and drag down, objects are set to be responsive in height or width. I've got either fluid containers or fixed content, depending on how I want to set it up. Notice that those are fluid text containers. And until I hit that next breakpoint, I then have a 2-column structure. So as you're designing, thinking it through, and even taking the time to build out each of your component types, let's say a text container or a contact form or a footer of links, to do what the Muse Themes folks have done and make sure that you design them for all of the breakpoints, think through that structure. Then as you're producing your site, you can use those elements, especially if they're in a wireframe mode. You can come back and flesh out the fonts and the colors. I think is really, really effective as you're learning to design across all of these responsive layouts. All right, I'm eating up the time left and right here. So let's go back to see where we are on my list. Okay, I want to just start looking at different approaches. One of the things I'm personally working on, and if survey says that, in fact, let's just decide it. 2 weeks from now, the next session is going to be on how to use widgets in combinations, so nested widgets for responsive design. And for that, I'm going to actually put together a free widget on the widget directory that will not be well designed because, again, I'm not competing with my widget vendors, but it will show you how to build out the sort of navigation functionality that we expect for mobile navigation using the default features in Muse. So no extra third-party widgets, just standard widget components. And I have some examples of that navigation that I wanted to talk about. So I will deliver this in 2 weeks, I promise, because I said it to you publicly. And in the meantime, we'll talk a little bit about how these are created. So from a navigation standpoint, again, this is to me the most challenging, one of the most challenging parts of the new world of Muse, which is if I don't have scroll effects, how do I have navigation that gets in the way when I need it and out of the way when I'm limited in my space? So navigation, I think, is really important. The Pigeon site, so this is something that's part of that CC Learn tutorial that you could download if you wanted. Notice that I've got navigation on the right-hand side, and when I get towards that tablet class of devices, I have what's known as a Hamburger menu or a push menu. When I click it, notice the words introducing Pigeon and that kick scooter move down. It's because it's using a push methodology, a push menu. And this is using the Accordion widget. And when I expand that Accordion widget, I have a button and I have a menu widget inside of it. So this is described in that Building Your First Site. Maybe Colby, do me a solid if you want to, and if you can dig up the Pigeon tutorial, maybe throw that into the chat. You can find it on the tutorials page of the Microsite up there in the What's New section. But that link does include this widget in the handout, in essence, the tutorials that you take with you. So that's one methodology I think that makes sense. Another one is a Lightbox method. And this is a template from 123 Muse. And Chris Kellett and Daniel Kellett have delivered it. I've given you a link here that I'm going to go ahead and grab. Let's see if I did a good job. I know I put it in. Okay. All right, I'm going to grab this link for you. This start template is from 123 Muse, and it has both template and demo assets. The 123 Muse folks gave me a link that I'm allowed to give out. If you click that link, it will create a Creative Cloud folder, not a library and app, but a folder. Let's go ahead and click it. And that folder will give you the source Muse file and all of the assets in your Creative Cloud folder on your desktop of your computer. So he's got some tutorials here. He has all of the source content and the Muse file, and you're welcome to take that and play with it. But one of the methods that they use in the design that I thought was quite good is, I'm forgetting now, he uses a Lightbox for his mobile navigation. So here I am on the site, and I might be even on the desktop version. I think he's doing the same thing. Yeah. So he's using one form of navigation across all breakpoints. Again, the less you do in your life, the less you have to fiddle with across breakpoints. So this is kind of a nice global navigation feature that you're seeing more and more. Personally, I think when you're on a desktop and you've got the space, you should probably show the desktop navigation. It's only in limited space like a tablet or phone that I think hamburger menus belong. But it's totally, there's definitely a trend I've seen where the navigation is always hidden and invisible when you need it. This second methodology of using built-in Muse allows you to click on that trigger in essence and bring up a lightbox. Notice that this lightbox is going to just fill the screen no matter how narrow the browser is. So it's that same navigation that gets you across all the pages. And that's simply using Lightbox widget. So it's a trigger target widget and with the lightbox enabled. So clicking this trigger brings up the lightbox, and in the lightbox is a close box with a manual menu or a dynamic menu. All right. Like I said, we'll dig into exactly how we do this in 2 weeks a little bit more. Another one I thought was just lovely, and this is Site of the Day this week, so tomorrow. A woman by the name of Ingrid did just such a terrific job with her responsive site. So you'll notice here that I'm in the desktop version, and she's got her navigation here. And when I click it, it does this adorable little reveal. And I didn't know how. People make fun of me. Ali Pordelli from the cookie team laughed at me yesterday saying, "What's so hard about that?" And I thought it was impressive. So clicking this makes it happen. The way that this one is done is by using a trigger and target. Let's go ahead and look because I want to double check and it's worth dissecting. So I have Ingrid's site here, and I'm going to go ahead and look at her master. Notice she's got a lot of breakpoints, and this is why I wanted to ask Razvan and Colby about any fear about having so many breakpoints. Her site seems to work really well. She's done two things here, kind of interesting. One thing is, in order to get this icon, if I drag it off, the icon is, let's just see here. Yeah, I'm going to drag the icon away for a second. What she did to render that is she's using a little bit of embed code that gives you basically font awesome font. So notice here, it's a very simple piece of code that's just calling up that icon. I probably would have just placed an SVG, then it would be scalable and small. So forget about that for a minute, that's her icon. But what she did here is created a composition widget. So that composition widget here has a trigger, and it has its target, which is up here. The target is just a text frame for her. It could be a manual or dynamic menu, just some text boxes in her case. And she has it configured such that when you click on it, it shows the target elements, but the transition is vertical. It's incredibly clever. So that vertical transition gives it that sort of roll-up reveal. So if we go back to her live site, I get that roll-up reveal. It's like it's swiping up. I just thought it was sweet. So if I go to a smaller instance, she's got other breakpoints where she's moving it down. This allows her to avoid it getting too crowded up there in the header area. If we come all the way down to the phone layout, she's actually moving even lower and covering up her name right there. But it works with her design, I think, by design. So I think that's another way to have terrific navigation without having to use any third-party widgets at this point, all built-in features. All right, another one I wanted to talk about, and this is kind of hearkening back to days before scroll effects, sadly, where we used to use an approach for navigation. There was a beta tester, his name's Jeremy Goldberg. I don't think he hangs around with us anymore. I think he was like 18 years old from Phoenix, Arizona, when he first started using Muse. And he did what we call the Goldberg effect. And that effect is coming back into vogue with the lack of scroll effects. And the idea is that I've got a site here. This will be site of the day, I think, next Friday. And you'll notice in my desktop design, I've got up at the top a slideshow. And I've got some triggers here. I will show you how to achieve this in the world of responsive, because this is not a trigger target. Right now, our composition widgets are not responsive in width. So there's a back door that I'm going to teach you for this real quickly in just a few minutes using the slideshow widget. But notice as I come along here, I've got my hero area up towards the top. And as I scroll down, I've got this nice navigation, but it's kind of big and kind of heavy. And I don't want it pinned to the top of my screen. So what happens is as I get towards the top and that navigation goes away, notice I have the reveal of another navigation. So underneath that top level is another level. It's got a shadow of its own, so it sits on top, it's pinned, and it's layered below this layer. So it's below the hero area above it, but it's above all the other active page content. And now I have a pinned navigation that's persistent. And when I roll to that place, I can click in and grab probably what's an accordion widget here with all my navigation options. So that's just an accordion that expands down. It's probably not 100% height because we don't support that, but if I zoom way out, maybe, to a disgusting level, see how it does end? It's not infinite, but it's tall enough that most desktop screens never see the bottom of that. Told you the session's all about the tricks. So coming back out, if I were to go ahead, so that's one thing, how do I pin my navigation? Another one is things like back to top for smaller devices. If I drag to a phone layout level and start at the top, so now I'm on a phone and I'm scrolling down, I don't necessarily have pin navigation at the top, but I want an easy way to let people on a phone be able to jump back up to the top of the screen. Notice that this designer went in and again pinned a piece of navigation. So this is in the browser here. If it were this back to top button, let's say, I would position it, and then in the pinning interface, I would pin it in relationship to the top corner of the browser. So that's how this element stays put. It's pinned there, and it's going to just stay as I scroll down towards the bottom. It's got transparency, so it's not too offensive, but it's in a fixed location that takes me back to the top of the screen. If I go out towards, I think, a tablet size and drag down, maybe it's just on the phone. So again, just nice tips for persistent navigation and achieving that feature that we've had in the past using the existing feature set. Let's see how we're doing. Couple more things, and then I am going to jump into, all right, I promised it. Let's talk about the hero area that's up here for a second. This has kind of been bugging me. Colby knows about it. I saw somebody in the chat talking about it. The one widget that I'm desperate to have a responsive version for is Trigger Target, and the guys will tell you why we have not implemented that yet to some extent, but it's important to me. We may or may not get it in a timely fashion, but there is an interesting way to work around the lack of using a composition widget. So you notice here we have basically images that are rotating through and the ability to come and click these dots and jump between them. Let's go back to that lovely rowing site. In the rowing site, I kind of go a step further. So I have not dots, but bars here. And in the composition widget, when you click on any one of them, you can come in and click a link to learn more, take you to another place on the site. And that's the beauty of composition widgets. Slideshows really don't have a click area necessarily that you can define. So one backdoor that's going to make Colby jump out of his skin, are you ready, is to use the slideshow widget in a different way than we've done before. So I'm going to do this really quickly, not necessarily in the best way, but I think it's kind of fun and interesting, and it makes Colby nervous, which is great. He doesn't even know what I'm about to show yet. Okay, so what I would suggest here, before I do this, I need to make sure I have my act together. CC Libraries, PRC. So what I did is I wanted to see how far I could get using SVG and slideshows to my end goal. And I went into Illustrator and I recreated, if you look at what I've got going on here, they lend themselves to Illustrator. I've got a background image, then I've got some text. I've got some images that I could place in Illustrator. So I can build all of these little add rotator elements in Illustrator. And I went in and did that. I've rebuilt them in Illustrator, and I have them as SVG content. So the approach that I was looking to take, are you ready, is to come to my widget library. I'm going to grab the slideshow widget, and I'll bring the thumbnail instance onto the canvas. I'm going to get this guy in place. I've got thumbnails up here. This is going to be my little triggers that you've seen, the little dots, believe it or not. And I'll show you the trick for that I had to be taught because I had no idea how you people are doing this feature. I've seen a lot. I'm going to come into the hero area here. And this is why the slideshow widget is a little more friendly than composition. I can actually say to the hero content, go ahead and be stretched to the browser width. But what I want to do is tell it to, in the new hero content, to fill to, let's see what I want here. I want to fit content proportionately. So when my content is a certain height, I want it to stop growing. If I say fill, it's going to grow to the full width of the browser. I don't want that here. For this design, I don't need previous, I don't need next, and I don't need the counter. I do need the caption, and this is the sad part that's going to make Colby squirm. And I've got my hero area here, and I've got my thumbnails. What I'm going to do now is go to the CC Library section, and I'm going to take that content. Let's make this just, I'm going to simulate the dark background. I don't want to bother getting that dark image, so I'm just going to give myself something attractive. These colors are never all that great. Gee. I know. Don't cry. I'll warm it up here real quick. It's going to get very pumpkin Halloween looking. Ugh. Okay. Doesn't matter, Danny. Move on. Okay. So with a dark background, I'm going to now bring over these elements. So what I want to do is just grab the SVG content and place it into my slideshow. So click and release. to add it in there. Nice, right? So it's going to remain proportional height to width. It's going to stop growing based on the height of the element. I'll do that again with another element and place that guy. We'll do a fourth. I probably would shift the order of these so they're a little different. Notice it's got transparency showing that fabulous, terrible shade of color. And that's good enough. So I now have, in essence, these three different items. Here's the bizarre, weird way that our users are doing those little dots. Are you ready for it? I'm going to select one of my thumbnails. Let's zoom in on this. And real quickly, I'm going to come in and just make it rather square. So I'll come in and have it be 20 by 20. And I'm going to give it a fill color. We'll just say in the normal state, we're going to make it white. And in the rollover and down state, have to carry this fabulous shade of awfulness and a little bit of a darker instance, maybe. You'll notice not a lot's happening there over on the right, but that's okay. So I now have my rollover, my mouse down, and my active state. See if I can grab that same color, which I won't be able to, but that's okay. We'll act like we meant it to be darker. Okay, I now have an object which has different colors applied, right? Here's the weird magic. Are you ready? Because this is really a thumbnail, I'm going to double click to select the thumbnail, and then double click again to select the image placed inside the thumbnail, and I'm going to drag it out. Nice, huh? Click once, click twice, drag it out of the way. Just hiding it outside the crop of this container. Nice, huh? Now I'm going to come in and select all of these guys again. And let's just round out the corners. And make sure, you know, I can increase the roundness to make sure they stay round, but they're looking pretty good. All right, I now have a little nibble that takes me between my different slides. The last thing, the last awful bit is, see how I have a caption here? What I can do is drag this caption kind of over my area and delete the text. I know, Colby says no, and she's laughing. Fill it with nothing, stroke it with nothing, and with it selected, in the hyperlinks area, give it a link. So I'm linking to adobe.com, but now when you are on this screen and you go to click the old buy now, that caption is going to take you to where it needs to go. I could do that for each of them, put a different link for each of them in the slideshow. But the magic, the best part, is now if I come into the browser, because this is SVG, as I resize, if the world wants to be kind, it scales pretty well. Now, odd things are happening still. Notice that my dots need to be played with. I can center them. I probably need to add some breakpoints at different spots and move the dots to different locations. My images, so that they don't move down on the page, I'm going to add the breakpoints and move them back up. But I think it's somewhat viable at this stage in our life to get that rotating hero behavior using existing widgets. Yay. All right. It is 1 minute till end. I did pretty well. As I mentioned, I promised you we're going to play more with widgets in 2 weeks from now. But I want to jump back and see how we're doing. Let's see, I'm going to go here. So are there questions that did not come up? Looks like everybody is wholeheartedly excited about talking about widgets in 2 weeks, so I'm going to do that. Nobody else came up with a better idea. If we did not cover something you want to cover today, please put it in the chat. It's your responsibility. Chris, I already gave away your free starter template, but you're welcome to stay around and see if there's any questions on that. And that's what I got. As I mentioned, in the spirit of a jam session, I will read through the chat myself. Dan's got his hand raised, but I don't know what his question is. So Dan, go ahead and put it in the chat if you do have a question. Any other topics? So sort of as we finish here, you need to tell me how well we did. Looks like we did pretty well this time, even though my brain was a little fuzzy. So how responsive Muse and Viewport Scaling interact across various device sizes. I asked that questions a couple times, and I will poke Razvan again a little bit. I'm under the impression, what I've been told is the smallest breakpoint will use Viewport Scaling. Breakpoints above that are going to be a little bit more based on, so the smallest one will scale down to that small device. As soon as I think you hit the second breakpoint, it's going to go to that breakpoint. But the assumption is the resolution of your browser matches that, right? So if, let's say I'm on an iPhone 4 and it's only 300 pixels wide, I'm making this up because I don't know the answer as far as pixel size goes. For an iPhone, a 400 pixel width breakpoint is going to scale down to 320, let's say. If I'm on an iPhone 6 Plus and I'm in portrait or landscape orientation, the world thinks that that's a tablet. So it's going to take the width and that content that is at that width and represent it. So I believe Viewport Scaling only is relevant in the smallest breakpoint because you'll have content that is larger to use in any larger device. Okay. That is all I have for this week. Thank you everyone for your time. Hope to see you in 2 weeks. If you didn't catch all of this will be on YouTube. Send us your sight of the days. We love to see them. And keep the great work going. We're just so excited about this new release and hope you continue